Hello, I'm Soul, the Guildmaster and the mostly raid leader of Prisoners of Warcraft, an AOTC guild that's been killing stuff since Mid-Burning Crusade, which is about 13 years. Damn, that's a long time. 13 years means that I call it Pal is a teenager with a bad attitude, which is roughly what our guild sums up to be. During my time as a content creator, I've spoken from this endangered perspective. I don't know what I did to keep this guild going, but I've talked about what I've done that I think had helped it to not fall into total ruin. And today I'm going to talk about what I've done throughout 2020, a unique year with unique circumstances, including the launch of Shadowlands, which has so far been a pretty crazy successful thing at bringing players in and keeping them interested. This probably won't turn out to be much of a list, but I'm going to try my best to separate all these major points in the navigation bar, so please bear with me. Throughout 2020, I promised myself that I would provide a little bit of stability. One of the big benefits of being in a guild is that whole sense of familiarity, right? Like, when someone shows up for raid time, they expect me to be online, ready to call for invites. It's my unspoken goal. Okay, maybe it is my very spoken goal. It's to create the expectation that the guild's got something going on Tuesdays and Thursdays, our normal times. Even if it's like the 20th week of normal Nyalotha with our 4th or 5th alts, because the show must go on, right? Even if fewer people are showing up for it. It felt even more important as the pandemic raged on. Now, I would like to think that even if being part of the guild and here for raids was only a small respite from the crazy reality going on outside, it was a small escape, if nothing else. And I was lucky, because there were a handful of times when not enough people showed up for a raid night, but instead of grabbing pugs, we would run some old content together for a few hours. And it wasn't much, but it was an escape all the same. Being Guildmaster means that people pay attention to you, which is expected and sometimes uncomfortable because it means that your tone helps to set the mood, the vibe, the atmosphere, and that doesn't really turn off. If you come in hot and angry, that's gonna put people off. If you sound over positive and bubbly, you might be considered to be out of touch. Now, I self-identify as a subdued optimist. I have my moments of awkward energy or weird energy, but for the most part, I try to even out the atmosphere with my droning tone and my often devil's advocate sort of discussion style. And this usually comes out when I drop a line or two about the Shadowlands beta, something that I was always engaged in outside of raid nights. Because remember, we were coming out of BFA, Battle for Azeroth, and between that and the pandemic and the usual lull between expansions, it wasn't possible for me, at least mentally, it wasn't possible for me to just force people to get excited about things that I happen to be excited about. Maybe I was paranoid about how people would react, but I guess I didn't try to shove my excitement down people's throats. But because of that, Shadowlands started creeping up, with the guild feeling a lot of skepticism and apprehension over how alt-friendly it was going to be, and the meaning behind removing the infinite grind, all those things. But being Guildmaster also meant stamping out toxicity directly. Now, I'm really tolerant to a fault. I put up with a lot of negativity without letting it get to me. You can sort of say that comes with being a YouTube person, but I had to kick someone who performed decently, but they dragged down the team with unwarranted but regular outbursts, and it took longer than it should have for me to notice it. It came to the point where people didn't feel very excited to come to raids. It really came down to the fact that neither me nor the guild were a good match for this person. They needed a more accepting environment, and so they got the boot. I should have done it sooner, but in retrospect, it's okay. It's too late for that, because, well, I like to think that they're now in another guild, and I hope that they're thriving. And as it turned out, our guild was being very receptive towards Shadowlands, and a lot of people have logged on and they're playing, they're running dungeons and Torghast, and recently they've done the raids. In fact, there were well over 30 people online on the first Tuesday ready to go. So I screwed up by just inviting whoever applied over the past however many months. I was honestly just thinking to myself, okay, yeah, people want in, I'll let them in. But nah, there's no way that I'll be over on people come raid night. Pfft, no biggie. Haha, boy. But between the new people and the guildmates who returned from break, I was really blown away from the response. And I was horrified because I had to pick and choose people to come in, and as a raid leader of what's supposed to be a chill group, I've not been shy about this. I absolutely hate the feeling of telling anyone who was, planning out their day and they were planning for a fun Tuesday night that's, sorry, all full. I don't have room for you. Because of some bar that I had to set, like item level or signing up or being late and so on. And these are all reasonable things. It's all on me. I screwed up, and that kept me up at night. I had no plan for having more than 30 people, and I didn't have enough people in the right roles to properly field 2 smaller raid teams. I don't have a working plan for that now, because you don't just issue a decree and say, ta-da, there's a second group. It needs a leader and a few core members to build the team's overall personality, and the rest of the team is built around that. It also needs a proper schedule that I know I wouldn't want to intersect with the existing schedule. I don't want people's alts joining that raid, and there's a lot more to consider. And ultimately, this may not work, but all I can tell myself is that I'm going to do my best to support it, not unlike, growing a plant or something. And sometimes even the best care might not get results, and I have to be prepared to clean things up if it gets messy. But away from that for now, the start of Shadowlands meant a lot of engagement with the guild, from answering questions whose answers would otherwise be found on fan sites and forums, and hey, I make videos too. But in the background, I spent a lot of time stocking up the guild bank. It's not simply about just throwing gold at it, but it's also about taking core people and building this culture of cooperation. That meant having a place to take in materials and then organize them in the bank to have that vibe of having an organized guild ready to take care of its people. So I was amused seeing this whole clash with the culture of self-sustainability in part of many members that mostly comes from being part of the pug world, which I'll try to talk about in a little bit. But I was prepared to craft a bunch of these plate legendary base pieces, but I only made a handful because the rest of them just bought what they needed from the auction house. That's cool, I guess. But nevertheless, the bank provides, which takes a lot of unnecessary burden from individual members who know that the guild's got their back. And that's a very attractive perk to draw in and keep members. It also helps to sell thousands of gliders to help finance a lot of this. And there's a careful balance to be had between having members be a part of the guild's economy and wanting their own stash of gold and resources for a rainy day for them. This really came down to communication and coordination with the guild's more active crafters, with some gentle reminders to the guild as a whole of what it needs, which is herbs. By the way, guys, we could use... I want more herbs, please. A regular challenge that I have personally, it's definitely an ongoing thing, but it's to participate in more smaller group content. Despite who I am and what I do, I have a limited time for World of Warcraft, so when someone blows the horn for doing a Mythic Plus or something, I try to consider myself a last priority so I can get to my other commitments, and meanwhile the other person, who ideally is a guildmate, they would tank and they would get some gear, because I'm not as concerned about my personal item level. The challenge that I continue to have in the guild is probably what many groups or guilds have. It's that there's never enough critical roles, as in the tanks and the healers, to run content, and hence the perfectly normal practice of turning to pugs. And I hate that. I just hate it. When it comes to short bursts of group content like running dungeons, the goal isn't just gear or to run a good key. In guild, it's about team building and bonding. We're going to see each other week after week after week, and this is a spoken/unspoken thing. It's a lost practice in the pug world, and I respect that. But I don't envy players who live exclusively in that world of more or less, the faceless strangers. The way I see it, that's what really separates playing in a guild as opposed to playing in a pug, because in a pug, each member is in it for themselves, and they assume that everyone else is in it for themselves, and it assumes that everyone knows what they're doing to ensure victory. The goal, for the most part, is to get gear. In a guild, each member is part of a whole, and we're adding to that, whether it's supplying them with consumables or gear or giving advice and so on and so forth. All of this contributes to this collective, not individual, but a collective victory. The goal, for the most part, is to overcome challenges together. The gear just kind of happens as it goes. That's where I come from when I say that I don't want Master Looter to come back, but I would like item level restrictions on personal loot to be lifted. But when it comes to knowing where your guildmates are at, nothing is assumed, and there's a measure of responsibility for the people in charge to be on top of that, or the people who are running groups with these people to identify that. Ultimately, this is just a different way to play. But it's easy to see how dangerous it can be to mix these people together, people that are all pug or all guild or whatever. There's the potential to generate a lot of toxicity without a lot of coaching, or I guess reprogramming. Now let me get back to the raid part. In the first week of the new season, the raid was more or less, it was a clusterfuck, to be honest. We had consumables to pass out, but the procedure and that whole thing was kind of a mess. And as tradition, in the first week of a raid, or the first time we encounter bosses, we go into these polls completely blind to mechanics and all that stuff. But of course, that does cut into time to run back. There was, of course, the tuning and the adjustments that weren't quite in yet, but putting those aside, we just didn't do well the other week. It was really demoralizing to the team to wipe for like 3 straight hours on Sun King, largely because the timers for deadly boss mods were off for that. I think it's called Ember Blast, but again, that's just an excuse. We just didn't do well. It's important to acknowledge the loss publicly and just take it on the chin, but to also remind the team that, hey, guys, this is the first week, and we're just exploring. Not just the raid environment, but this gauntlet that Blizzard had designed for us, and it's up to us to figure it out. Not to read some guide and follow someone else's instruction manual, but to try, to bleed, and then succeed. Maybe I can put that on a shirt. Bleed and then succeed. Okay, never mind. Anyway, responding to a terrible raid night is usually to, lick wounds, look at meters, and then prepare for the next raid week. Only this time, I had a very healthy roster of guildmates who've been playing almost every day. I can tell that at least some of them were pissed off and hungry for vengeance, and to deny them that for 5 full days, from Thursday to Tuesday, that would be pretty agonizing. So in a moment that's so rare, I don't think I've done this since like Wrath of the Lich King, I took about half of the raid. So I took about 15, 16 people. I took them on an informal Saturday run, and we just happened to beat 2 new bosses, including Sun King. I intended to learn, but we ended up pushing a little bit farther than I would have expected, and that felt plenty good. It was a morale boost for the guild, even if on the individual level, I can kind of feel a sort of grumbling from people who just didn't make the cut. So while that was very impromptu, setting a schedule and a sign-up sheet was a total must, given that we had over 30 people interested in raiding. Now, I was too forgiving the first week, and I went with these 30 people. In hindsight, it probably wasn't a good idea, but given the hotfixes that came soon after, maybe it didn't matter. With such a large roster, it was easier for me to bring too many and then cut people as needed, but that's not something that I wanted to do in the first week, because every fight, every pull was progression. I was sending people off to die at a whim, and on my dime, which is, another nice perk for the guild, a fairly generous repair limit that I don't turn off. Anyway, I wasn't going to kick people for underperforming, especially when I'm not sure how well some of these people mesh together in a larger group, so I was doing a lot of observing, and again, it's week 1. Relax. Of course, the next week, and I'm only talking about just this past Tuesday because of this recording, dude, we pulled a total 180. 1 week's worth of raid and Mythic Plus gear, it upped our damage considerably. Passing out resources and consumables, we did a much better job this time around. We had prior fight knowledge among the core members, and this time, a modest roster of 28. Woo! I also made a strong point that when it comes to performance, and I say this a lot, it's not a problem till it's a problem, which translates to me asking low DPS to step out if it's clear that that would fix issues. And so I guess that kind of lit a fire under people's butts, and they're like, "OMG, I better, I better step it up." The reality of our raids is that there's like this core team of high performers, and then there's everyone else who at minimum will at least do the mechanics to not get everyone killed. And hopefully they'll pass me on damage. And I'm good with that, as long as we all have a good attitude for it. From just this past week, the handful of wins and losses has sort of tempered and polished the team, and now we can really test our mettle against these newer bosses. And we have 3 hours in the raid week left to do it. I don't know if it can be done, but, well, that's the game, isn't it? To overcome doubt with good play. That's my sort of guild blog for the year, and I want to thank you for listening to a few of my thoughts. Like the piece if it was worth it, and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. We'll see you later, folks. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.